If you are viewing this program after its original air date, there may have been changes to information discussed during the presentation. The positions and opinions expressed by the speakers are strictly their own and do not necessarily represent the views of their employers, nor those of the DC Bar, its Board of Governors, or co-sponsoring communities and organizations. And I will now turn the program over to Ann Wilcox, who is the co-chair of the DC Affairs Community Steering Committee.
Thank you very much, Jess, and thanks again to the Bar staff for all of the support they give us in all of our programs. I want to welcome the candidates, our moderators, and all of you who have joined us tonight for this at-large council candidate debate. We know how difficult and time-consuming it is to run for office in DC, so we thank the candidates for their time and participation tonight. My name is Ann Wilcox. I'm co-chair of our DC Affairs Steering Committee of the DC Bar. We want to welcome you on behalf of our community, which presents programs on DC policy and politics and participates in litigation and legislative efforts as part of the DC Bar communities. Some of the other communities include real estate, criminal law, probate, and other areas of the law, but we cover all things DC. Also assisting in our debate tonight is a fellow steering committee member, Austin Ownby, who's a counsel at Foley Hoag, and we appreciate his participation. We especially want to thank our journalist participants who will be introduced by Jim Bubar, our moderator. James Bubar is a 5-term co-chair of the DC Affairs community over the years and serves on the Bar's Committee on Communities that oversees all Bar community activities. Jim has his own law practice and has been active on DC democracy and statehood issues, including helping to draft the Supreme Court amicus briefs and congressional testimony that our group submitted. Jim will introduce our journalists and take it away. Thank you, Jim.
Great. Thank you, Ann, and thank you for all of your hard work on behalf of the DC Affairs community over the years. So it's my job to introduce the panel and the candidates and explain the rules for tonight's forum. First, our journalists. Julie Zauzmer Weil covers DC's local government for the Washington Post, and she has worked at the Washington Post since 2013. James Wright Jr., our other journalist, is the DC political reporter for the Washington Informer newspaper. He has been a journalist for 30 years, including working for the Washington Afro-American newspaper and the Washington Post. And now the candidates for at-large city council member. I will introduce them in a random order as determined by the website random.org. Karim D. Marshall, an independent. Council member Anita Bonds, the Democratic nominee. Council member Elissa Silverman, independent. David Schwartzman, DC Statehood Green nominee. Council member Kenyon McDuffie, an independent. Giuseppe Niosi, the Republican nominee, and Fred Hill, an independent, and Graham McLaughlin, also an independent. And now the format. Due to the large number of candidates and the desire to hear from all candidates on as many topics as possible, there will be no opening statements. However, each candidate will have an opportunity to give closing remarks at the end. Now, this forum is on the record and is on the DC Bar's YouTube channel. We've had over 100 people sign up to listen to tonight's forum, and our last program received over 2,400 views on YouTube. So we expect tonight's to have a good viewing. Now, we will alternate questioning between the journalists. Each will ask 2 questions and have an opportunity to follow up. And before the other journalist will have that same opportunity. Some of the questions may be directed to the entire panel and some to particular candidates. If any of the candidates have an interest in responding and they weren't called on, please raise your hand and let us know so the journalist can recognize you. Candidates will have up to 1 minute to respond. If the reporters wish to follow up, the candidates will have an additional 30 seconds to answer the follow-up question. If you are addressed by name by another candidate, you will also have 30 seconds within which to respond. We have a timekeeper who will let you know when your time is up. And for purposes of this forum, this forum, we want to inform the voters about your issues. So we would ask that, to the extent possible, you address your answers to the questions that are put to you, and refrain from addressing any other candidate by name. After the reporters are finished, we will take questions from those of you viewing the program remotely. Please submit them in the area on the website provided for questions and answers. You can also put them in the chat and we'll try to pick them up. We may have some of our own questions, and we will ask as many questions as we have time. Finally, all candidates will be allowed a 1-minute closing, and the order for speaking in the closing is the same order that I introduced the candidates, and that's the random order determined by the website random.org. So it's my pleasure to turn the program over to the two journalists, to Julie and to James, and let you ask your questions. Thank you.
Hello, thanks to everyone for being here with us tonight. We're going to start with some questions directed to specific candidates. There are many candidates in this election, as you know, so not everyone will get a chance to answer every question. I'm going to start by asking Mr. Marshall, on a scale of 1 terrible to 5 excellent, how would you rate the current council at its role conducting oversight of DC agencies? What agency do you think the council needs to do a better job overseeing, and why would you choose that agency?
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Karim Marshall, candidate for DC Council at Large. And I think part of the reason I got this question is because I've made no secret of the fact that our council has done a terrible job at oversight. Now, I think the core question about this is, what do you define as oversight? I believe that oversight is a combination of identifying problems, but also being responsible and low ego enough to seek solutions. Our council is very good at pointing fingers after the fact. I mean, if you look at the fact that this housing authority audit came out from HUD, which really just reiterated all the complaints that residents, commissioners that are former commissioners, and anybody who's paying attention, these are things that have been said for the last decade. But suddenly, because there's a HUD report, these issues are now serious. I think one of the things that we have to do as a council is be more concerned with solving the issues that affect our residents, and less concerned with favorable coverage or getting accolades from other politicos. Oversight is supposed to be boring, hard work, where you're working with the executive to identify problems, work on their solutions, make sure they're adequately funded, and then follow up over the course of time to make sure that it works.
It's been a minute, but I want to give you a few more seconds. Can you identify a specific agency that you think needs more oversight?
I think we can say DCHA needs a lot of help, but we also need a lot of help with our mental services agency, so DBH and Department of Health.
Thank you. Mr. Niosi, how do you think the council is doing on oversight, and what specific agency would you like more oversight of?
Thank you for the question. I think that the council has really lost touch with many of the residents in Washington, D.C. Having spent the greater part of the last year actually door knocking in the communities in all 8 wards and hearing from the mouths of voters themselves, I found that many people are disenfranchised, disappointed. They're not happy with the status quo, and a lot of them have said, well, what has the council done for me? And to kind of reiterate sort of what Karim was saying, housing has been kind of a major issue, especially after seeing the most recent HUD report. But for me, the thing that I'm kind of mostly focused on is making sure that we no longer have a 20-year record high crime wave. Murders are up, and I have a problem with that. I think that a lot of the policies that we've been seeing on the council have done nothing to mitigate a lot of the crimes that we're seeing. And in the exact opposite, they've actually kind of perpetuated or made it a little bit more available for people to commit crimes. And so I would have to say, any agency that is sort of surrounding that idea of public safety, I think needs to be looked at.
Thank you very much. And lastly, I'd like to ask Mr. Schwartzman this question. What agency would you like to oversee more?
Well, I actually have at least 3. first of all, the committee of the whole. I'll start with that. And the human services in particular, because the focus in my campaign is to eliminate child poverty. And I think human services has not looked at this issue seriously enough, particularly since the 10th income support level is 37% of the federal poverty level. Highest level in the country is white children in New Hampshire are getting 60%. And this is a recommendation which I helped to fashion for the Fair Budget Coalition. I would also point to health, because the life expectancy gap between Black and white residents has actually grown in the last 20 years. Shockingly grown, not shrunk. And I testified to the committee of the whole 2 years ago on this issue. So these are critical issues that need to be addressed much more seriously, because they affect the lives of so many of our residents, and we could do much better given our more than adequate tax base. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, let's move on to the subject of public campaign finance, which I believe all of the candidates participating tonight are participants in the public campaign financing program. Councilmember Silverman, how well do you think the public campaign financing program has achieved its goals? Are there any changes that you would make to the program?
Good evening, Julie, James, and everyone watching. I'm Elissa Silverman. I think the public financing program has achieved the goal. The goal was to eliminate money as a barrier to entry for elections. And what we have seen in other cities, for example, New York City, is that it particularly encouraged women and candidates of color to get in the race because, for historical reasons of racism and sexism, women and candidates of color have had less access to money. I will say that, I have run as a fair elections candidate before fair elections. I've always relied on small donors and never taken corporate money. So for me, it's not that much different, honestly, except for the match. But I do think it's successful in that we are seeing money no longer be an obstacle for people running.
Thank you very much. Mr. McLaughlin, are there any changes that you as a first-time candidate would like to make to how campaign financing works in the district?
Yeah, I would say if the goal is to make sure that we have new talent come in, if the goal is to make sure that as a city we have the best and brightest who are able to run and be elected to office, I think there's a lot of levers we can pull. As a first-time candidate, some of my learnings are, number one, the importance of term limits. We see a polarization nationally and even a polarization within this city around, having to really be ideological and go to a base in order to be able to get elected and get reelected, versus really thinking about, hey, I'm not always against the mayor, I'm not always for the mayor, I'm not always with X, I'm not always with Y, but really thinking about how am I always with the people. That's what I want to do. That's why I would term limit myself, because I think that's a critical aspect of ensuring that we have a political system where folks are making the right decision for the largest number of people every time.
Thank you. Mr. Hill, what do you think about the public campaign financing program? And perhaps what do you think about Mr. McLaughlin's idea of term limits?
Well, first, I make no secret about it. I'm against the fair elections program. Many people in this city do not understand that it's the taxpayers' dollars that's being given as a match. And that's 5 to 1. For every $10, you get $50 of taxpayers' money to finance a candidate who desires to get into this race. But all you really need to do is get out here and knock on enough doors, shake enough hands, and kiss enough babies, and you'll build your base. With what Graham had mentioned about term limits, I'm also in agreement with having that. There are some on the council right now who believe that there's not enough time in a 4-year period. And my position as a 25-year successful business owner is that you need to be ready, not get ready. And that takes a lot of time. When you come in with the knowledge and the understanding of what the job is that you want to do, you save time. If you have to come in and try the OJT method of learning what needs to be done, serving the people in this city, it's the wrong job for you. And we've seen that carried out with the current council members that we see right now. Thank you.
I have a question for Councilmember Silverman, Mr. Hill, and David Schwartzman. Mr. Schwartzman, you took me to task in terms of writing positively about some of your fellow candidates and their support from developers. Councilmember Silverman, you are the Wicked Witch of the West to some business people in Washington, D.C. And Fred Hill, you are a businessman. And I want to ask you all to comment on what's wrong with developers? What's wrong with development? Don't you realize that a growing city must have development and must have a healthy development sector in order to grow? Isn't that the truth? Starting with Mr. Schwartzman.
Yes, we need development, equitable development, not gentrification and displacement of long-term residents, most of whom are Black. That has been the pattern because of development here, because the Wilson building is really developer-occupied territory. And they have a very heavy weight on the policies, along with the Federal City Council, which is basically the voice of the big banks, corporate sector, and the developer sector. So, of course, developers have a role, but I would like to see a big shift in our housing policy to one, recognizing that housing is a human right. We need to decommodify housing, and there are solutions that we can begin to use, in particular social housing. There's a hearing on November 17th. I'm testifying, Janice Lewis George's bill, as well as community land trusts. And we know that a majority of DC residents cannot afford the rent, market rate rents, which are embedded in the Housing Production Trust Fund mechanism. And that's why the rents keep on going up. And this is a failed system. And by the way, getting back to your first point, Mr. Wright, I think that that the Informer has substituted news for editorials, because certain candidates got a lot of prominent representation photos, and others have not. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Councilmember Silverman, you are the Wicked Witch of the West to some people in the business community. Is that true? And are you hostile and hateful to developers?
So, James, I appreciate colorful language, but I do have to bristle at the gender connotations here. Here is, first of all, I agree with David. The issue is that developers have an outsized influence, both in terms of the campaign finances of some folks in this race and in terms of influence at the Wilson building. Now, let me say, Sandy Wilkes of the Wilkes Company, one of the biggest real estate concerns in the city, contributes to me. Tom Borger Management, also a supporter. Here's who's not a supporter: MRP. MRP has given thousands of dollars in friends and family contributions to candidates who they think have the best chance of knocking me off the council. Well, why? Because MRP is developing the DC Housing Authority's headquarters, which I considered a giveaway to them and to David Jannerone of Taylor Adams. And so I question developer subsidies, whether it be in the Housing Production Trust Fund or the land that they're getting for a song from the housing authority. And that's why they have it out for me.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Silverman.
Thank you, James.
Mr. Hill.
See you at Halloween.
Mr. Hill, you are a businessman, so
Yes.
naturally you support what developers want. Is that correct?
That is incorrect. I do not support what developers want. What I have experienced in 25 years of being in business is retaliatory effort after retaliatory effort of not being paid within a reasonable time. My own company went as much as over $1 million in 9 months of not being paid on construction projects for the services that we provided. Not one complaint filed, not one concern addressed or presented to my staff or I, and it was only because I stood up and held them accountable for taking too long as to the reason why we had been retaliated. The district government right now owes me since July of last year almost $500,000. So it's ridiculous. It's not just with the developers, it's with our city officials as well. And when you look at how they have destroyed the local small business market by not including them in these development projects, we saw just a few years ago, there was a $5 billion set aside for small businesses. The same 10 companies who were considered to be small businesses benefited from that money. Thank you.
My second question, thank you, Mr. Hill. My second question goes to Karim Marshall, Graham McLaughlin, but I want to start off with Mr. Niosi. Washington, D.C. wants to be the 51st state. What have you done in order to ensure or to work towards statehood? I'm going to start with you with Mr. Niosi because your party does not support statehood. What is your position on statehood?
Well, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to, express sort of the answer to this question. I've been born and raised in Washington, D.C. I'm a third generation Washingtonian, and the D.C. statehood issue has been something very personal to me throughout my entire life. When I was a high school kid going into college, I actually interned with one of the most pronounced advocates for DC statehood, Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton. And so that's sort of what's framed the reference for me, running in this race. So the statehood issue is something that I am for. However, I just want to make sure that we have, adequate schools. I want to make sure that our schools are being taken care of. I want to make sure that, our children are reading and doing math at grade level. I want to make sure that our streets are safe, that people who are residents or visitors in our city can enjoy themselves. And I want to make sure that we have a small or a robust local and small business community that people can enjoy. So,
Mr. Niosi, before I get to this question in terms of the other two, are you willing to go to the Republican National Committee and say what you just said here?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that one of the big things that we need to ensure is the right person for the job to actually have a communication with the people in my party to say, hey, back off. We're trying to do something here.
Thank you very much. Mr. Marshall, what have you done for DC statehood?
So the great thing about DC statehood is that we're at a point where the work for statehood doesn't require us to do any talking to each other inside the district. We have a near unanimous public opinion on advancing statehood. So what I've been doing, what I hope most of us have been doing as responsible citizens, is every single time I have the opportunity, whether it's when I'm teaching environmental justice, whether it's when I'm on a trip, when I'm talking to people who don't come from DC, but still live in the United States, whenever I have the opportunity to say so, I'm educating people who live in other states that can actually make sure that their senators are advancing statehood for the District of Columbia, that, hey, there's 700,000 people who live in the United States that don't have full and fair representation. Wouldn't it be great if we could fix that issue? Hey, can you talk to your senator about that? Oh, look, you can go to their website right now and send them a quick email that says, hey, I support statehood. Why don't you? So I think we really need to get out of this notion that the fight about statehood is how many demonstrations we can do inside DC or how much we can point to each other as visible champions of statehood to each other. Because frankly, if anybody is in the District of Columbia that doesn't support statehood, they shouldn't still be in the District of Columbia. But what we need to be doing is using every single opportunity whenever we come across somebody who doesn't live in DC to inform them about our issue and to make sure that they understand that they're the critical champions at this point and to provide them with the tools to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Mr. McLaughlin, you're sort of a newbie to the DC political scene. Welcome, I guess. My question is that since you're a newbie, what have you done for DC statehood?
Thanks for that rousing introduction for me there, James. But I agree with Karim's point on the importance of external advocacy in order to move statehood forward. And just FYI, Fred, you're the one showing, so if you mute, it'll help me see. But secondly, we need to take the operational steps in order to get there as well. For instance, we have an opportunity to take parole back from the Federal Bureau of Prisons and take it into DC. As some of you know, I opened my home and lived with guys coming out of prison for a decade, worked with individuals coming out of incarceration to launch their own businesses that now hire about 40 DC residents, and have walked side by side, as Fred has as well, with many returning citizens in order to ensure they don't recidivate and are able to be productive, impactful citizens in this city. I think when we can do things like that, when I can support taking action to be able to take things back into the district, it moves us one step forward to be able to then, when we have the opportunity, move into full statehood.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That completes my first round.
Councilmember Bonds, I want to welcome you. Thank you so much for joining us. I will start the question with you. What some concrete steps that the DC Council can take to protect residents' access to abortion, including in the event that Republicans win a majority in Congress in this upcoming election?
I think I heard all of your question. There was a little spotty there, but I believe the issue you want discussed is what steps can we take in the city to make sure that abortion rights are perpetuated? Well, we can do just that, and to make sure that the laws that we have on the books will protect a woman's right to an abortion and really to freedom and access to decide for themselves how they handle their bodies. I think another issue that which is very similar, is to make sure that we do more as a government with the community on the issue of maternal health. I think they go hand in hand. Number of the individuals, the women who have a great concern about the recent Supreme Court decisions are concerned about their general health. And so I think as long as you are in the District of Columbia, any woman will know that they have the right and access, and we will do everything to preserve and protect that. We consider ourselves a sanctuary city, in fact.
Thank you very much. Mr. McLaughlin, can you name any concrete steps you believe the DC Council should be taking to protect abortion access?
In these, it's a challenger many times, should basically say, oh, council's doing terrible in all of these different ways. But I want to commend, the council members who are on now, and that I think that they have done a number of things to work to make sure from a sanctuary city, and some of the other things that Councilmember Bonds has just talked about. So, first thing that I would say is just I commend the swift action of the 3 council members running here and the other council members as well, and want to give credit where credit is due. I do think when we think more broadly about health access and structural access, there's a lot that we can be doing on thinking about where are we placing medical facilities, how are we making sure that birthing people have access not just to abortion services, but overall maternal health services. How are we thinking about doula and other coverage as part of our Medicaid, et cetera. So, I think holistically from a structural and from a coverage standpoint and from an access standpoint, there's a lot we can be doing, including on abortion coverage. But I think the council, for the sort of question on federal legislation, has moved quickly and swiftly, and I commend them.
Thank you very much. And when we talk about this, we are often talking about if Republicans take over Congress, will Republicans try to interfere in DC abortion access, among many other issues? So I wanted to ask Mr. Niosi, as the Republican running in this race, what's your position on abortion access in DC and what should or shouldn't be done by the council?
Thank you for the question. I'll lead with this. I am probably in the minority of my own party, but I'm a pro-choice Republican. I'm a safe, legal, but rare. And so with that being said, Washington, D.C. has worked so hard to maintain governance of itself that the idea for people pushing ideology onto the city that the voters, the people of D.C., and anyone involved did not want is something that I would uphold as a council member. And I recognize that we live in sort of a tribalistic world where, it's either red or blue. And being the Republican, if I were to win on the council, I think the idea of working with members of my party to push back and say, the people of DC have already made an effort to vote on this. We've already determined what we wanted, and you're not going to win this one. This is personal to us. So that's something that I think would be the biggest steps, is just to keep the Republicans who are looking to change things at bay.
Thank you very much. All right, I think this next question will be quicker, so I'm going to ask all 7 of you, starting with Mr. Marshall. As you all know very well, every DC resident can vote for 2 candidates in this at-large election. Who do you plan to vote for as your second vote, Mr. Marshall?
So the funny thing is, I know who I'm voting for, and I'm not trying to be evasive, but I have actually reached out to BOE and OCF about whether or not I can even do this publicly. But I will say this, I can tell you what the characteristics of my second vote are going to be, because I haven't gotten a straight answer and I don't want to inadvertently commit a campaign finance violation. What I will say is this, I'm looking for a person who has the humility to understand that they don't have all the answers. I'm looking for a person who is solution oriented. I'm looking for a person that's willing to build partnerships. And I'm looking for a person that knows how to identify problems, but also identify solutions. I think we need more of that on the council. So that's what I'll say.
We asked the same question at this same forum 2 years ago, and most of the candidates answered it. So I don't know of any campaign finance violation, but you may know more than I do. Mr. Schwartzman, who do you plan to give your second vote to?
Well, I've already made it clear at forums. My second vote is going to Elissa Silverman. I'm endorsing her for re-election because she's done an excellent job to protect the rights of the working class in this city, and she deserves to return to the council. We have some disagreements, but that's always the case. No one's perfect, including myself. And so I accept criticism too. But I think it's important to push back against the agenda of the Washington Post editorial board, which, and I know Colbert King is on the editorial board, but he's recently come out for Elissa. But the board itself, we know who they endorsed. And I think we should push back against this agenda because the Post for a long time has promoted trickle-down economics in this city, and we need a stronger progressive bloc in the council to implement what I call a Green New Deal for DC, a more just DC, a better life for everyone, every resident. And that's what I'm running for. Please, voters, look at my website.
Thank you. Mr. Hill.
Okay. I don't mind mentioning that my second vote will go to Karim Marshall, and that is because we are the only candidates east of the river. I believe that better representation comes from the people within. and no one knows better what's going on there than we do. I live in Ward 8. I have for over 20-something years, and I've watched how this government has ignored east of the river for far too long. And right now, we're not having a fair or an equitable division of funds for our rec school, for our rec centers, for our public schools, even in policing. It's not fair. And right now, I don't see any of the other council members taking a stand for us. So that's where my vote's going to go.
Thank you. Councilmember Silverman, how are you planning to use your second vote?
I've told David, and I've told his wife, who, God bless Joanne for coming to all the forums, that I am going to vote for David Schwartzman as my second vote. We share, I think, a very common agenda of fighting for working families in this city. David's right. We don't agree on everything, but I think we largely agree that is big money special interests who have dominated the agenda at the Wilson Building. And, you know, we saw a demonstration, but I think are pushing, and I have to say, you know, out of all the folks who are not incumbents, you know, running, David is at hearings. When I have a hearing, when there's a hearing on TANF, he's there. When there's a hearing on affordable housing, he's there. When there's even a hearing on policing, David's there. You know, he has been active, and also he's just fun to be with. I enjoy running against him. So that will be my second vote.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin.
I encourage a lot of folks that voting is private, because when you are a challenger, one of the things that you have to focus on is folks being concerned that you know, support may have consequences if you do not have the ability to get in. So like Karim, I'm going to talk about, and I really value what he said and really admire his insight and intellect and the way he approaches problems. So similarly, you know, kind of thinking about what are the qualities, and I think it is someone who has the both head and the heart to be able to drive positive change. And I think for voters, as they think about who are their two choices, the questions that I'm asking myself, and I would encourage them to ask, are, you know, where do you want the city to go? Do you think that it's kind of going down the positive track now? Do you want to stick with your same council members? Do you want to stick with the kind of status quo? Or do you want positive change? Do you want to try something new? And if new, what are the qualities that you want in someone? So that's kind of how I'm thinking about my second vote.
Thank you. I may have been wrong that this would be quicker, but I think the answers are very interesting. Mr. Niosi?
Thank you for the question. And, you know, Karim actually had me scared a little bit with the OCF. I don't want to get in trouble with them because, you know, I'm a new candidate. I don't want to have any sort of snafus. But, you know, to kind of echo what both Karim and Graham were saying, you know, voting is private. You know, I am running to be a different type of candidate. You know, the idea of having diversity of thought on the council is something that resonates with me. And recognizing sort of what the whole purpose of some of these, what they call the minority seat on the council for the at-large member sort of is supposed to represent, you know, sort of the idea that there are a number of people in the city that voices are never heard, and I want to be a voice for those, you know, for those people. And this is coming across all 8 wards, you know, from when I've been literally door knocking and listening to voters. You know, people just feel as if they're not being taken care of, and I want to, you know, make sure to take care of that with some positive change. So, you know, I guess that would be the answer to the question is, you know, any of the candidates that, you know, represent positive change would be who I would vote for.
All right, thank you. And Councilmember Bonds, who gets your second vote?
So, firstly, I will be voting a full Democratic slate. I am committed to that, and I think many in the city are. Secondly, my second vote could really be any of my colleagues that are here. It could be one of my current colleagues on the council. And I say that because everyone who has put themselves forth to be a candidate in the District of Columbia at this time, I think is very sincere and interested in change and interested in bringing about the new day that we're all facing throughout the district. So I'm going to leave it at that and leave my colleagues kind of guessing. But you know, those attributes that I've heard tonight are very important attributes, and I hope we all are taking it very seriously.
Thank you very much. Back to Mr. Wright.
Thank you, Julie. Excellent questions. I have a question for Councilmember Bonds, Niosi, and Schwartzman. There are some people who say that the DC public school system is great and improving, and it's the fifth fastest growing in the country. And there are some people who say it sucks and it doesn't work for everybody. So my question to you, Councilmember Bonds, Mr. Niosi, and Schwartzman is, do you support mayoral control of the school system? Starting with Councilmember Bonds.
Yes, I do. And I lived here through times when it was an independent body. I lived through the time when it was kind of quasi in the sense that the executive was responsible for making the repairs to the schools. And now we're at a point where we're still working almost quasi, but it's really under mayoral control. So yes, I do support it. I can tell you that some of the services that the school systems get are services that have to come through the executive side of the government. If we were to change, which we could very easily do, I think that we have new models that would work and deliver the quality education that we need. From my viewpoint, one of the biggest hurdles that we're facing is really diminishing registration of the students in schools once they get to a certain level as they move into high school. And we have to have some programming that excites and is inclusive of the issues and the concerns that these young people are facing as they attempt to go into adulthood. And we're not there yet. There are a number of situations where we've had an opportunity to do more, and we just haven't linked up to it, I'll say at this time, as it relates to career opportunities. In other parts of the country, young people get to high school and they have an opportunity to think about and to move into career opportunities. I see Ann tells me I'm time.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Bonds. Mr. Niosi, do you support mayoral control of schools? And what about school choice?
Thank you for the question. So I do actually support Mayor Bowser's control of the schools, and frankly, I think it comes down to an accountability issue and a quality assurance issue. And I also, to answer your second part of the question, I also do support parental choice because, to me, I believe that parents know exactly what their children need to succeed. I think that if the parent is going to look for the best opportunity for their child, they should and they deserve to do so. One of the things that I see not much of, and I'd like to actually kind of add more to, is the idea of trade and technical development schools. Because, frankly, as a midshipman at the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy, I learned a lot of skills from plumbing to welding to electrical work. And these are skills that I've taken with me throughout my entire career. And I think that some people learn differently. Some people learn with their hands. Some people learn in a more laboratory setting. And I'd like to see that be implemented from a high school level and even into a further development level, past high school. So it gives people an opportunity to actually get a skill, to get a job that they're looking for. And, we definitely need these jobs to help stimulate a local economy. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Schwartzman, do we need to have continued mayoral control of the schools?
No, I'm opposed to it. And this is a legacy of the semi-privatization of our public school system, starting with Fenty and Michelle Rhee. I think the bottom-up input of communities have been reduced in shaping education. We've seen the closure of public schools, and I would say that look, I've addressed so many questionnaires already, including from teachers, parent groups, and so on. This question is an important question. Inequities have been maintained in the school system. And if you go to a wealthy award, parents have the income to donate to ensure there are adequate supplies. This is not necessarily true east of the river. So these inequities continue, and so does homelessness in the school system. So we see homeless children in the school. And at the root of a lot of the school performance issues is child poverty. And I collaborated with the late Liz Davis, who to get a strong resolution to hike the tax rate on the wealthy, which was passed last summer. Liz Davis introduced this resolution to the Metro AFL Council, AFL-CIO Council, and it was passed. And that was important in passage of this very important victory for people. So I see I'm out of time.
All right, thank you, sir. Mr. Marshall wanted to weigh in. 30 seconds, Mr. Marshall.
Yes, sir. So the only thing I would say is who controls the school system is actually a really good opportunity for us to think beyond the dichotomy of mayoral control versus board control. One of the pieces that we can actually reform is making sure that the person who's running the school system meets certain educational qualifications, but is also insulated from the political noise. If we set them up like the CFO or the chief procurement officer, where they have requirements in a fixed term and they could only be terminated for cause, it would actually get rid of a lot of the politics that go on in the operations of the school system, but it would still give them access to the infrastructure that allows them to maintain, deal with standards, make sure that our buildings are up to code and not just falling apart when we're still doing readiness tours in August.
Thank you very much. I got my last question. This is just a yes or no, and you can give a little explanation, but Mr. Bubar is telling me to move it on. So here it is. Go Commanders! Do you support a taxpayer-financed stadium, whether it's at RFK or Popular Point or somewhere else in the district, for our Commanders? Let me start with Ms. Bonds.
No.
Okay.
And I've said that before, many times.
Councilmember Silverman. Okay.
No.
No. Mr. Marshall.
Yeah, there's no reason for taxpayers to pay for this.
Thank you. Mr. Niosi.
As a longtime fan of the franchise, I think that we need a new owner, and until that happens, I would have to say no. But willing to address it later.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin.
No.
All right, Mr. Schwartzman.
What answer do you think I'm going to say?
No.
And I would like to see the team being publicly owned. Then I would be reconsidered. And I think there is a team in the United States that is publicly owned. So
Green Bay Packers.
Yes, indeed. I'm not a football fan, but thanks for that.
All right. Thank you very much. Those are my questions.
You forgot Mr. Hill.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Mr. Hill. Okay, I'm sorry.
That's all right. I've been forgotten before. No problem. Absolutely not. It's just like the fair elections money. I think there's a better use of the real investors, I call in this city, the taxpayers' money, than to give it to a billionaire.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your response.
All right. Well, thank you very, very much. Julie, your questions were fantastic. James, terrific. And thank you, panelists, for answering their questions. Now, I have a few questions of my own They're gleaned from DC Affairs members and also from our audience. So I'll start with returning to our favorite topic, which is DC's democracy and statehood, with House Republicans threatening to limit DC's authority and saying they will repeal the Home Rule Act if they retake the House. What can we do to continue to be self-governing in the District of Columbia and get statehood? And in answering this question, please tell me a couple of things that you've done to promote DC democracy and statehood, and a couple of things that you think you might want to do in the future, because we're always open to new ideas. If you want to answer this question, I'm going to do a little differently than Julie and James. I'm going to ask you to raise your hand, and then I'll call on you. Okay, so the first hand I saw was Karim's. So what do you think?
So I said this a little bit earlier, but I think one of the things we really have to focus on is the ability to put pressure on Republicans and Democrats in other jurisdictions that have the ability to make statehood a reality for the District of Columbia. And that's something that I've been doing for years. Again, whenever I teach a class, a lot of the students are not from the District of Columbia. They have families that are out of state. So I push them to understand that they have a responsibility to make sure that their representatives are not actively disenfranchising the residents of the District of Columbia. One of the things that I think we need to do better as a jurisdiction, particularly a jurisdiction that is overwhelmingly Democratic, is to do a better job at reaching out to Republicans. We don't really have much of a dialogue between the House and the Senate Republicans and our governance. And it's important to remember that even though we have limited home rule, we still have to work with Congress in order to maintain that home rule until we become a state. So we have to be more aggressive about affirmatively reaching out, making sure that they see themselves on the issues that we agree on. We have a better credit rating than the federal government. So if we talk about financial responsibility, that's something we can work with them on because we do it better than they do.
All right. So let me call on Anita Bonds.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Jim. As you know, that you and I together as members of the Democratic Party, local party, and I as having a seat on the National Executive Committee, have done a few things which are somewhat unique in that we have been before the Resolutions Committee and had the whole issue of DC statehood put before the Democrats across the country and have gotten it on the platform. So that's one thing that we have done actively. I think the things that we have before us now are those areas of self-government that we can push harder for without having statehood. We've talked a little bit recently about our criminal justice system and how we would really have our own jail again. And I think there are elements of governance that are similar to that we still have not gotten a handle on and are not yet under our exclusive purview. I believe we need to move in that direction. And I say that because I've been in too many audiences with those who are of the GOP, as they like to call themselves, Mr. Niosi, and they have been very strong on how they feel that this is the Constitution, and the Constitution says that the District of Columbia is this set-aside entity. I know here in the district, we have pushed very hard to put together our so-called plan that can work, and that would involve expanding the governance of our city. And I'm all for that. I think our wards can be much smaller. So I have a bunch of ideas, having worked on this when I was first out of school, to actually move the issue of home rule for the city.
Thank you very much, Anita. Let me call on Elissa Silverman. Do you have any thoughts?
Yes, Jim, this is a big concern. And what I would say is we have to if there is a Republican House and Senate, we have to appeal, I think. First of all, there was Republican support for home rule when home rule went into place. And I think we have to appeal to the Republican beliefs in local control. I think Giuseppe mentioned this earlier. On social issues like abortion, we have a big problem. But I think in terms of local autonomy, I think we make the case, and there was Republican support from home rule when home rule went into place in the 70s, which is that, local voters should have the say over local laws. I think we need to do everything we can as a government, and I think this is where there is agreement between the legislature and the executive on making sure, protecting, I would say, and then strengthening the home rule charter. You asked about personal things we've done. So I have worked for candidates in Maryland and in Virginia. Hala Ayala, who unfortunately lost as the governor's race, or as lieutenant governor's race. But I first helped elect her when she first ran for the State House in Virginia. I've worked for candidates across the country, which I think helps strengthen our hand when it comes to statehood.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Silverman. Anyone else like to talk about this issue? I see Giuseppe, we've heard from you already on statehood, I believe. Do you have anything else you want to add?
Yeah, and I'll be brief. The dawning of home rule in the I think it was 1973. I could be wrong on that exact date, but it was during the Republican administration that granted DC the right to have ownership of itself. And to kind of echo what Karim was saying, the idea of working across the aisle is very imperative, especially in this sort of time of day that we're living in. But also just recognize we need to make sure that we have our own affairs in order. So I just kind of reiterating the idea that we have a 20-year homicide, record homicide right now. We have students who especially coming out of COVID, they're not performing as best as they could in schools. And I think that getting our own affairs in order, certainly helps make the case better when we are trying to reach across the aisle. And so I think not only that, but just to kind of reiterate the idea that Republicans, let's not forget that this is just a national talking point that sort of rallies a group of people, and let's not be falling into the politics of everything. When in reality, this is something that's very personal to the residents and the Washingtonians that live here, and it's something that we can't pretend that it's not a massive issue and just let it be pushed to the wayside.
All right, Fred Hill, I think your hand was up.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I consider everything that has been mentioned a given. Those are the things that we're going to have to do. But I also come from the position of a business owner, and I like to see you be ready, not get ready. And part of that means that we have to look at everything else that is going to be needed to be in place before we can operate as a state. Are we going to have counties? Are we going to have separate police departments within the counties? The jurisdictions of the areas? What is it going to all look like? Because we're going to end up getting the position to go in to be a state, and then we're going to be scrambling, trying to do all these other pieces. It's a beautiful proposition that's been put before us as the Constitution proposed, but I don't think it goes deep enough. And it needs to answer all those questions so people can be educated on this process before we get going into it, not be in the blind and not understand what needs to be done next so that we can be ahead of the call that's going to be before us. So don't wait to the last minute. It's the same thing with voting. Don't wait to the last minute. Get out there and get involved in the early voting, October 31st through the 6th, and If you can't make it then, show up at the polls on the 8th, but don't wait till the last minute. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you. So thank you very much for those unique views. I want to shift, because we're running out of time here, to what you just mentioned, the conduct of elections. The way we conduct elections continues to be an issue around the country with, as you know, the former president continued to claim falsely that his election was stolen. And Democrats continue to fight to ensure that every eligible voter can vote around the country. Here in the district, we now mail ballots to every registered voter, and the council is considering ranked choice voting, mobile voting, extending the vote to 16 and 17-year-olds, and it was reported in the Post yesterday, non-citizen residents. Do you feel that we need to change the way we conduct elections in the district, and what specifically would you recommend? Does anybody want to take that question? Karim always has his hand up first, so I'm going to jump to him.
I was a gunner in law school. So I think we can do a couple of things. I actually am I believe I'm the only person who's implemented ranked choice voting in a significant election. I secured the passage of and implemented ranked choice voting in my law school. And one of my reservations about the way we've advanced ranked choice voting in the district is that it's result oriented as opposed to process oriented. There's some really good methods out there that we should be looking at incorporating, like the Alaska model, very successful. But I think we can look at ranked choice voting and a lot of these other potential reforms to the way that we do elections. But we also really do need to think about term limits. We need to think about requiring our council members to have options for what they're going to do for employment after 8 years. It creates a sense of identity beyond just being the council member, and it requires them to have the perspective of, I have to live in this city once my term is over. So it probably will bring down some of the hostility in the way our council operates, because they still have to exist in the city once they're no longer a council member, as opposed to thinking they can get perpetually reelected. One of the other things we probably need to think about, though, is election security. And I mean that solely from the perspective of mobile voting. We actually did a test on mobile voting several years ago, and there were a lot of security concerns around whether or not the ballot was protected. So I want us to do it, but I want us to do it in a way that's perfect, secure, and gives the people a confirmation of who they actually voted for.
Okay, Karim, let me follow up on that and ask you about what was in the Washington Post yesterday, namely extending the vote to non-citizens.
Yeah, so it's constitutional. Non-citizens can vote in local elections. As long as they don't go anywhere near a federal ballot, they're not at risk and we don't have a problem. And if they live in the community, why shouldn't they have a voice in the way in which their community is governed? I think we have to be very careful about the implicit undertone of that question is pitting Black residents against new Central American or South American residents. And I wholeheartedly reject that. If you live in this community, you should have a voice in this community. And I don't like the way that the Post is sort of implicitly implying that the presence of newly arrived residents, because they come from South America or Central America or anywhere else in the country, that they're going to diminish or dilute Black political power because we give them a voice in their community.
All right, we've got a lively chat going on about this in the chat room. But Graham, you have your hand up, so tell me what you think.
I'd add on to the point of the importance of every voice in this city being heard. I think mail-in ballots is an equity and a racial equity issue. We have hundreds of years of structural breakage in this country that has caused differences in types of jobs, in wealth inequity, et cetera. And it is a lot easier for some, namely those with my skin color, who traditionally don't have as many jobs in industries where you can't just, go off for an hour to vote, et cetera. And so I think mail-in ballot is incredibly important to democratizing and truly having a voice for everybody in this city. And I think that's a broader point too on ensuring that elected representatives are representing all people. Second point, building on Karim's point again, and something I said earlier about term limits, when we think about how we ensure that every voice is heard, I think we must make sure that politicians aren't building that political career by having to go to a base, but really thinking about how are we listening to the will of the people, trying to do what's right each time, even though that means you may switch back and forth on different things. So those are the two things that I think are most important for ensuring that every voice is heard. I'm strongly for ranked choice voting for all the reasons why folks feel ranked choice voting is the right reasoning, and ensuring that folks don't feel like their vote is wasted if they're voting for who they think is the best candidate. So all of those measures, and again, I think council has done a nice job on pushing some of those forward, are where I weigh in on those issues.
Okay, thank you very much. Shifting to a new topic quickly, because I want to move this thing along. As an at-large member, your vote will be needed to pass legislation that might have a negative impact on a single ward. There's a lot of discussion now about homeless shelter construction and bike lanes, particularly those on Connecticut Avenue. How do you make decisions when at least one of your colleagues, the ward member of the impacted ward, is seeking your support to block the measure, even as its passage is needed in the best interest of the city as a whole? In other words, the homeless shelters have to go somewhere, the bike lanes have to go somewhere. How do you raise this as a citywide issue and not just a ward issue? I'm going to call on Anita Bonds, since she is the most, I would say, of this panel, probably the most experienced. And then I'll call on Elissa, who's probably the second most.
Thank you very much for giving me that prompt. I really, Jim, that is always a tough issue for anyone who has a vote. And it's a tough issue because you do 100% want to listen to your colleagues, because there is an assumption made, and rightfully so, that the colleague representing a ward would really have inside information from their constituents that perhaps you would not have been able to gather if you're representing another ward or another part of the city, or the city as a whole. It's a tough issue, but I like to look at any issue from the perspective, how does it affect the whole of the city? And what value is it to the whole of the city? And so that is how I vote. I will listen to every voice that comes forward, but ultimately I have to make the decision based on what is going to benefit the city. It's not my thing. It's not your thing. It's what's going to benefit the city. And that's a tough issue sometimes, because there is the extreme lobbying, not just from the registered lobbyists, but the advocates that pretty much control many of the agendas that are put forth at the council. I would like to see the advocates register just like the lobbyists. And I would like to have a process where it's very clear as to who is talking to whom and about whatever the subject is. Not to stop the process, but certainly to make the process more transparent, a word that we all use much too much and don't implement it.
Okay, thank you. And Elissa?
Well, let me start, Jim, by saying that Councilmember Bonds and I were part of the subcommittee that had to deal with an extremely difficult issue over this past year, redistricting. And it is a difficult issue because you are imposing change that is constitutionally necessary on folks that don't always want to see change. And I guess I would take a little issue with your characterization of providing homeless shelters or providing bicycle transportation as negative. I know people don't like change, and let's just say with the bike lanes, there's serious issues around people who have mobility issues, and some of the businesses are concerned about parking. But my approach, Jim, and it was the approach we had in redistricting, was listen, 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 listen. So we listen to residents, we listen to businesses. We listened again. We had a lot of hearings. And in the end, you have to make a decision based on what you think is the best public policy, for residents, and you can make compromises. Right now there are controversial bike lanes, for example, on Connecticut Avenue, and we're in the design phase. So I think our job is to make sure that DDOT is listening to the concerns and trying to address them. When it came to the short-term family shelter, we needed to have that distributed throughout the city. And we had to address the concerns, some of which were just not based in reality, and dispel some of these notions that it's going to be unsafe. But I think the main principle is to listen, Jim, is to take in all voices, make sure you're hearing from everyone, make sure you understand what their concerns are and try to address them.
All right, thank you, Elissa. And listening to you, I did not mean to characterize anything in a negative light. I was simply asking for your opinion. But I'm going to shift now to Austin Owensby, who is on our steering committee, and he has a question he'd like to put to a couple of you. Go ahead, Austin.
Good evening, candidates, and thank you very much for your time tonight. My question is a slight variation on a statehood issue. In July, the DC City Council passed a bill that allows adults to self-certify and access the licensed medical cannabis dispensaries here in the city. And the ABC board just recently announced 2 new cannabis dispensary licenses, bringing the total to 9, and 2 new cannabis cultivation centers, bringing the total to 10. On top of all that, earlier this month, President Biden issued an executive order pardoning all prior federal offenses of simple possession of cannabis, including those in DC, and initiating the process to review how marijuana is scheduled under federal law. My question is, if elected, how would you like to see the cannabis market develop in DC? And what, if anything, would you like to change about DC's current cannabis regulations? Like Jim, I will take hands. Fred, let's start with you.
Thank you. Let me see here. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you so much. The first thing that we need to understand when it comes to this new market that's growing all over the country is that it is not equitable here, nor has it ever been equitable here. And there again lies a problem that we have in this city, that there is not a fair opportunity for those who do want to get into it. Now, I don't. As a business owner, you couldn't tell me that somebody's going to come to work tomorrow smelling like marijuana and get in one of my $200,000 trucks. I'm not going to have it. But the thing that people need to understand is what's already approved by this council that has harmed a number of business people. And that's where I do speak up, because I've seen where there has, again, not been an equitable opportunity amongst the hundreds that want to do this. But then we also have had not the right innovative brain set on managing how it looks. If we look at the successful models across this country, why haven't we done that? We didn't do it with senior housing, senior tax reduction. We didn't do it with education. We didn't do it with policing. So we have to remember that the people that are making decisions right now in this council, right now in this government, have displayed time and time again that they do not have the incompetence to make these when they don't include the people sitting at the table. Invite the people to sit to the table with you and then make up the laws. I want to add in, when you were talking about the undocumented or not undocumented workers, but the people who are coming in from out of the country being allowed to vote. Again, this is what happened to DC residents for all these many years. We haven't been given an opportunity. So how are we going to tell somebody else what they can't have? When you talk about bike lanes and you talk about the homeless shelters, The bike lanes should only go in some areas of the city. Right now, we got bike lanes and we got cafe shops extending into some of the busiest corridors in the city. Who came up with that? And you create more you create more traffic. You also put more of the exhaust in those communities that didn't have standing traffic before. Nobody thought about that. But maybe it's somebody who got an idea from Minnesota or Wisconsin and thought that they could put it here. That's bad planning. Invite the people of the community to sit down. And I'm not talking about just a note to the
Thank
ANC.
you, Mr. Hill. Unfortunately,
right.
I think I've got time for one more response, and then we're going to have to move to closing statements. So you're going to have another opportunity in just a minute. But David, I see you've got your hand up. Would you like to comment on the cannabis market?
Indeed, and I've had my hand up in the last 3 questions, but they weren't recognized. I know James knows very well my record on Statehood. I put my detailed record in the chat, so I'm not going to talk about that. But on the cannabis issue, I echo some of the points that Mr. Hill just made about the lack of equity. And I would propose that the council consider a tax on the sale of marijuana and use that revenue to help the recovery program for people now suffering from addiction to alcohol and drugs that are now illegal. The drug war has had devastating impact on our community. And I applaud President Biden for the initiative he just recently made regarding, pardoning the marijuana people that used marijuana that were in prison. But I think that this issue needs to be addressed again in an equitable way. And furthermore, just to get back on this issue of statehood, all of these issues are related to the struggle for statehood because we need to empower the statehood movement locally. I agree with Mr. Marshall. Yes, it's important to develop to encourage residents all over the country to pressure their representatives to support statehood. But we need to empower our local movement to make it more militant, to make it stronger, and so it'll be taken more seriously, not only nationally, but internationally. There is a precedent, Brown versus Board of Education. Segregation was made an international embarrassment for the U.S. government. And that was an impetus actually to pass the Brown versus Board of Education. We need to make the denial of our rights, our neo-colonial status as residents in D.C., an international issue and embarrass our local national government, particularly if Congress, unfortunately, reverts to Republicans. We will lose the chance to pass a statehood resolution, statehood bill, in that case, at least for the next 2 years. But that should not stop.
Mr. Schwartzman, I'm going to cut you off right there. Unfortunately, I think we're out of time, and I think we have to move to closing statements. So you will get an opportunity to continue, but Jim, I turn it back over to you.
All right. Thank you, Austin, for your great moderating. Yes, regrettably, not everyone was able to answer every question. We kind of cut you off. So sorry about that, but that's the forum that we have, and we really are trying very, very hard to move this along. But now you're each going to have a minute. If there's a question that you really is still burning with you and you want to address it in your minute, please do that. So the order of speaking these closing statements was determined again by random.org. So we'll start with, believe it or not, Karim Marshall.
Good afternoon, everyone. First off, thank you for your time. I've put the link to my website, which has all of our positions, all of our questionnaires, and copies of all of the previous debates that all of us have been in. I invite you to watch them all, learn more information about each of us, but hopefully I'll be able to earn your support based off of my positions and my performance in this and the prior debates. I'm a third-generation Washingtonian, a product of DCPS and endorsed by the Washington Teachers Union. I'm the only practicing attorney that's running for this seat. And one of the things I want to be able to do is take my 12 years of government experience and be able to use them in order to make the District of Columbia government do its job better. In addition to my legal training, I also have a Lean Six Sigma certification. I'm really good at identifying and solving problems. That's what I do. That's what I did for the government. That's what I want to be able to do for you and make sure that you have a better, safer DC. We can fix the housing issue if we're a lot more thoughtful. We can make sure that public safety and education provide pathways for our residents and our children to have brighter, safer futures. But we need to improve the quality of our council. We need to make sure that they're actually doing the job that they're supposed to be doing and not just pointing at the executive when she falls on her face. We can do this. We can do this together. All we need to do is have the courage to change and demand better from our legislature. I'm Karim Marshall. I'm number 2 on the ballot, and I hope to be able to earn one of your 2 votes this November. Thank you.
Thank you. We turn now to Council Member Anita Bonds. Ms. Bonds, are you still with us? Well, we'll circle back to her at the end. We'll turn now to Council Member Elissa Silverman.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you to the DC Bar and our questioners tonight. I'm Elissa Silverman. It's been my honor to serve the district for the past 8 years as an at-large council member. I'm one of the 2 independents on the council. And I'm asking for one of your 2 votes to return me to the Wilson Building to keep the pressure on, to keep fighting for working families. And when it comes to housing, as Colby King said, I've been fighting an almost solitary battle to raise the alarms and focus on accountability. When it comes to jobs, I have done what a lot of people have said they want to do, which is make sure that we have opportunities for our residents. The mayor has copied my model when it comes to getting residents into healthcare jobs. We've created a commercial driver's license program, expanded not just summer youth employment jobs, but year-round employment jobs for youth, including for those who are most at risk. Again, Elissa Silverman, it has been my honor to serve the district, and I'm asking for one of your 2 votes so I can continue to do so. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you. And now David Schwartzman.
Yes, thank you. I'm a retired Howard University professor, 39 years service. I am the only climate scientist that's running for this office, and I've been an activist for climate justice for many years. Recently, I've been endorsed by 2 presidential candidates, namely Dr. Jill Stein and Howie Hawkins. And you can find their endorsements on my website. I put a link on the chat. My focus, as I started out, is to eliminate child poverty. That's a major goal which would have very positive impacts, not only the child, their family, but the whole community. And it has implications to many of the problems we now face in our community. I worked for many years for a progressive tax structure, and I had a major role in winning that victory last summer that hiked the taxes on the wealthy and targeted revenue to raise a DC earned income tax credit for low-wage workers, which has helped tens of thousands of families in DC, as well as housing the homeless, but that's still a challenge, and early childhood educators' income. So I will work as a council person to help implement a Green New Deal for DC. You can find out more on my website. My slogan is for the many, not the few. So I will use my office, and my salary will go into a fund to do this, to organize in collaboration with human rights organizations in the city that are fighting for real affordable housing and for more just DC. I see my time's up. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. We had a time set aside for Council Member Kenyon McDuffie, an independent, but he wasn't able to make it tonight. So we will jump now to Giuseppe Niosi, the Republican nominee.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for hosting the debate, all the moderators. Again, my name is Giuseppe Niosi. I'm a third-generation Washingtonian, born and raised in Brookland, Northeast DC. I attended St. Anselm's Abbey School, and later through the Mayor's Youth Leadership Institute, I received a congressional nomination to go to the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy, where I graduated with my engineering degree, my license in the U.S. Coast Guard, and my commission as an officer in the U.S. Navy Reserve. I still maintain that commission to this day, and with that comes a litany of different training. So to kind of answer the question of some of the the people that aren't from here voting in Washington D.C., I having a cybersecurity background with some of my training, I think it's a little bit of a not great. However, I'm running on a platform of public safety, better education, and local economy. Thank you very much, and I see my time is up.
Thank you very, very much. And now we turn to Fred Hill, an independent.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank the DC Bar for this invitation. I, as many of you know, I'm a 25-year successful business owner here in the district, hired over 500 DC residents, 180 returning citizens. So I understand what workforce development looks like. But I decided to get in this race because I could no longer see the people in the city be ignored for what they really needed. Our seniors need to not have any real property tax. Our educational system is suffering right now. We're being ranked number 41 through 49 out of 50 states. Our public safety, that includes our police officers, our fire emergency staff, our teachers, our janitors and cooks in the school system, and our sanitation workers, all grossly being underpaid. And I'm the only one calling with a specific plan of how we get them to 30% pay raise of what they have right now. The city is pushing almost $1 billion in waste and abuse. And we've seen a lot of that in the latest news gone out in the last week or so. But it's been going on for 10, 12 years. Now it's time to make a change for that. I have the knowledge, the skill, the courage, and the understanding of how to fix it. I'm a veteran, so I understand planning and execution. I'm a father and a grandfather, so I understand the need to protect our young. And right now, I'm asking you for your vote, one of two votes, on November 8th. I'm number 3 on the ballot. And again, my name is Fred Hill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. And now it's time for Graham McLaughlin, an independent.
This is an incredibly important election and decision you have in front of you. We have a $20 billion budget, the most per resident of any city in the nation. We have incredible talent across this city, incredible diversity. We're the nation's capital. And so I'd ask you, who are the two people in this race that you think can best steward that budget, who can provide the balanced oversight, who have the energy, the experience of getting things done, and the ability to work with people to use that effectively to build the equity, opportunity, safety, et cetera, all of the things that we all want. I've been running a health equity program that serves over 100 million people, so I know how to make an impact at scale. But I've also worked deeply in the community for the last 20 years, living with individuals coming out of prison for a decade, helping a number of returning citizens to launch their own businesses that now hire 40 DC residents, mentoring 2 boys for 8 years, who then found girls in college, so have not talked to me as much lately, but as it should be, and serving on a number of local community boards as well. I'm asking for one of your 2 votes to work as hard as I can for the next 4 years, to not care who gets credit, but to make sure that we make an impact and really fulfill both the collective potential that we have as a city and every individual within as well. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Graham. Anita Bonds, if you're still on the call, you're up. Okay, she's not. So with that, I'll turn to my colleagues on the DC Affairs community and ask if either of you want to close out the program.
Well, I'll take that opportunity to jump in here as Ann comes on camera. Thank you all again to the candidates. Thank you to everyone in the audience for participating in the chat and providing great comments. We really appreciate it. I want to echo comments that were made at the beginning that we would invite everyone to join everyone who's eligible to join the DC Bar's DC Affairs community. This is just one of the many great things that we do over the course of the year. And then I would invite everyone we have a holiday party coming up, and you're gonna have to keep me honest, December 8th, is that right? Yes, December 8th, we are having a holiday party in which we are honoring the many different legal services organizations around the city and the wonderful work that they've done over the last year and beyond, helping those who need access to legal services. So with that, thank you again to everyone. Good night and good luck.
Thank you, and
Thank
good
you.
night and good luck.